February 19, 1945. Sulfur Ridge, Mindanao, Philippines. Captain Hiroshi Tanaka pressed his face against the cold limestone wall of Cave Complex 7 as the screaming metal beast outside unleashed liquid fire that turned stone corridors into furnaces, incinerating everything within a 50-meter radius in temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. What the 847 Japanese defenders tunneled deep within the Kalamansig Mountain Range didn't know, what Imperial Command wouldn't fully comprehend for weeks, was that this morning marked the deployment of the most psychologically devastating weapon system ever engineered for subterranean warfare. The mathematics of their annihilation were being calculated not through conventional artillery bombardment or infantry assault, but through the systematic application of pressurized napalm delivered by armored vehicles specifically designed to penetrate cave systems that had been considered impregnable fortress positions. The American M67 Zippo flamethrower tanks, modified with extended fuel capacity and reinforced armor plating, were about to transform underground warfare from a defensive advantage into a death trap for thousands of Japanese soldiers who had spent months creating what they believed to be invulnerable positions. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The crisis confronting American forces had been building since December 1944, though its strategic implications stretched back to the fundamental nature of Pacific theater combat operations. Japanese military doctrine had evolved from open battlefield engagements to sophisticated cave warfare that maximized defensive capabilities, while minimizing exposure to superior American firepower and air superiority. Captain Tanaka understood what American commanders initially underestimated. The limestone geography of Mindanao's mountainous interior provided natural defensive positions that could be enhanced through systematic excavation, creating underground networks capable of housing entire battalions, while providing protected firing positions, ammunition storage, and medical facilities. These cave complexes represented the evolution of Japanese defensive strategy, from temporary field fortifications to permanent underground installations designed to inflict maximum casualties on advancing American forces. The Kalamansig Mountain Range contained 47 separate cave systems, each connected through carefully excavated tunnels that allowed rapid troop movement between defensive positions. Japanese engineers had spent 8 months transforming natural limestone caverns into sophisticated military installations, complete with ventilation systems, communication networks, and supply depots capable of sustaining prolonged siege conditions. According to captured Japanese engineering documents, the cave network design followed principles developed during previous Pacific theater engagements, where underground positions had proven devastatingly effective against conventional assault tactics. Multiple entrance points prevented complete isolation of defending forces. Interconnected tunnel systems allowed tactical flexibility and mutual support between defensive positions. Deep excavation provided protection against artillery bombardment and aerial bombing that had proven decisive in earlier island campaigns. Captain Tanaka had supervised construction of Cave Complex 7, the largest installation in the network, capable of housing 847 soldiers, along with ammunition, medical supplies, and communication equipment necessary for extended operations. The complex featured 3 main chambers connected by reinforced tunnels, each equipped with firing positions that provided overlapping fields of fire while remaining protected from direct assault. The psychological advantage of cave warfare extended beyond tactical considerations to fundamental questions of morale and military effectiveness. Japanese soldiers fighting from protected positions demonstrated remarkable resilience and combat efficiency compared to forces exposed to constant artillery bombardment and air attack. Underground installations provided psychological security that enhanced fighting capability, while creating tactical situations where superior American firepower advantages were significantly reduced. American intelligence estimates, later captured in operational planning documents, acknowledged that conventional assault tactics against fortified cave positions would require casualty ratios exceeding acceptable limits for successful campaign completion. Direct infantry assault against protected firing positions typically resulted in prohibitive losses without achieving tactical objectives. Artillery bombardment proved ineffective against targets protected by dozens of meters of limestone bedrock. Aerial bombing could not penetrate cave systems sufficiently to neutralize defensive installations. Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison of the 158th Infantry Regiment faced tactical challenges that conventional military doctrine had not adequately addressed. His regiment had advanced successfully across Mindanao's coastal plains using combined arms tactics that integrated infantry, artillery, and air support to overcome Japanese resistance. However, the transition from open terrain combat to cave warfare required fundamentally different approaches that challenged established operational procedures. The limestone cave networks presented unique tactical problems that could not be resolved through application of superior firepower alone. Japanese defensive positions were protected from direct fire weapons while providing excellent observation and firing positions against advancing American forces. The underground tunnel systems allowed rapid reinforcement of threatened positions while enabling tactical withdrawal when specific locations became untenable. Previous Pacific Theater operations had demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of Japanese cave warfare against conventional assault tactics. The battles for Iwo Jima and Okinawa had proven that underground defensive positions could inflict casualty ratios that threatened the sustainability of American offensive operations. These lessons influenced tactical planning for Mindanao operations, leading to development of specialized equipment and procedures designed specifically for cave warfare scenarios. The M67 flamethrower tank represented the culmination of engineering development programs initiated following early Pacific Theater encounters with Japanese cave warfare. Standard flamethrower systems lacked sufficient range and fuel capacity to effectively engage deep cave positions. Infantry portable flame weapons exposed operators to defensive fire while providing limited penetration capability against reinforced positions. The M67 solution integrated a Sherman tank chassis with specialized flamethrower systems designed to deliver pressurized napalm at ranges exceeding 150 meters. The armored protection enabled close approach to cave entrances while maintaining operator safety. Extended fuel capacity allowed sustained operations against multiple targets, without requiring frequent resupply. The pressurized delivery system generated flame streams capable of penetrating deep into cave systems while maintaining lethal temperatures throughout the engagement zone. Technical specifications developed by the Chemical Warfare Service indicated that M67 systems could deliver approximately 8,000 gallons of napalm through a pressurized nozzle system capable of producing flame streams with effective ranges of 180 meters. The napalm mixture, designated M1, combined gasoline with aluminum naphthenate and aluminum palmitate to create an adhesive incendiary compound that maintained combustion temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit while adhering to surfaces and continuing to burn for extended periods. The psychological warfare implications of flamethrower deployment against cave positions had been extensively analyzed by military intelligence specialists, who recognized that flame weapons produced terror responses that exceeded their purely tactical effectiveness. The combination of extreme temperatures, toxic combustion gases, and the primal human fear of fire created psychological pressure that could break defensive morale even when physical damage was limited. The first M67 flamethrower tank approached Cave Complex 7 at 0630 hours on February 19, 1945, moving through the pre-dawn darkness with engines muffled by special sound dampening equipment designed to minimize advance warning to defending forces. The psychological impact began before any flame was discharged, as Japanese sentries reported the approach of armored vehicles that did not conform to familiar tank configurations. Private Kenji Watanabe, positioned at the primary observation post for Cave Complex 7, transmitted the first warning to Captain Tanaka through the internal communication system that connected all defensive positions within the network. The approaching vehicles appeared to be modified Sherman tanks, but the turret configurations were unfamiliar, and the approach patterns suggested tactical purposes that differed from standard armored assault procedures. The technical modifications that distinguished M67 flamethrower tanks from conventional armor were immediately apparent to experienced Japanese defenders, who had encountered American tank formations throughout the Pacific Theater campaign. The enlarged turret structure housed flamethrower mechanisms rather than conventional gun systems. External fuel tanks increased the vehicle's profile while providing extended operational capacity. Specialized nozzle assemblies replaced traditional cannon tubes with equipment designed for liquid rather than projectile delivery. Captain Tanaka's initial tactical assessment recognized that the approaching vehicles represented new American capabilities specifically designed to address cave warfare challenges. The timing of their deployment, coinciding with the approach to the most heavily fortified section of Japanese defensive positions, indicated systematic planning rather than experimental testing of unproven equipment. The first flame discharge occurred at 0647 hours, when the lead M67 directed a sustained stream of burning napalm into the primary entrance of Cave Complex 7. The flame stream penetrated approximately 40 meters into the main tunnel before the pressurized fuel supply was exhausted, but the psychological impact was immediate and devastating throughout the entire defensive network. The technical effectiveness of the napalm delivery system exceeded theoretical projections developed during equipment testing phases. The pressurized stream maintained coherent flame characteristics throughout its trajectory, delivering lethal temperatures to the deepest accessible sections of the cave system. The adhesive properties of the napalm mixture ensured continued combustion after initial delivery, maintaining high temperatures and toxic gas production for extended periods. Private Watanabe's final communication described conditions that no previous military engagement had prepared Japanese forces to encounter. The approaching flame stream illuminated the cave entrance with intense orange light that penetrated deep into previously dark tunnels. The temperature increase was immediate and overwhelming, creating atmospheric conditions that made breathing difficult even in sections of the cave system not directly exposed to flame. The toxic gas production from burning napalm created additional hazards that conventional weapons systems could not replicate. Carbon monoxide concentrations reached lethal levels throughout interconnected tunnel systems as combustion consumed available oxygen, while producing poisonous gases that penetrated areas protected from direct flame exposure. The combination of extreme heat, toxic atmosphere, and psychological terror created conditions that no amount of tactical training or military discipline could adequately address. The systematic destruction. The deployment of 6 M67 flamethrower tanks against the Kalamansig Mountain Range cave network represented the first systematic application of flame weapons against fortified underground positions in Pacific Theater operations. Each vehicle carried sufficient fuel capacity to engage multiple cave entrances while maintaining sustained flame delivery for periods exceeding 12 minutes of continuous operation. The tactical coordination between flamethrower tanks demonstrated sophisticated understanding of cave warfare requirements developed through careful analysis of previous Pacific Theater engagements. Rather than simultaneous assault on all cave positions, the attack sequence targeted specific entrances in patterns designed to disrupt internal communication while preventing tactical withdrawal through interconnected tunnel systems. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Cave Complex 7 received the initial assault because intelligence analysis had identified it as the command center for the entire defensive network. The destruction of command and communication capabilities would prevent coordinated defensive response, while creating psychological pressure throughout the remaining cave positions. The systematic approach reflected American adaptation to cave warfare requirements through specialized tactics and equipment. The second phase of the assault targeted ammunition storage areas and supply depots, identified through aerial reconnaissance and intercepted communications. The elimination of logistical support would prevent sustained defensive operations, while creating additional psychological pressure on surviving defenders who recognized their inability to continue resistance without adequate supplies. Captain Tanaka's decision to attempt tactical withdrawal through the interconnected tunnel system was disrupted by the systematic targeting of tunnel entrances that connected Cave Complex 7 to adjacent positions. The American tactical coordination prevented escape, while ensuring that flame weapons could access previously protected areas through multiple approach routes. The technical performance of M67 systems during sustained operations validated development programs that had invested significant resources in creating specialized equipment for specific tactical requirements. The armored protection enabled close approach to cave entrances despite defensive fire from protected positions. The extended fuel capacity allowed engagement of multiple targets without operational interruption for resupply procedures. The psychological impact of systematic flame attacks created panic responses that propagated throughout the cave network, even in positions not directly threatened by flame weapons. Japanese soldiers in adjacent cave complexes reported hearing screams and explosions that continued for hours after initial flame attacks had concluded. The knowledge that defensive positions considered impregnable could be systematically destroyed by flame weapons created morale problems that extended beyond immediate tactical consequences. The testimony of survivors from Cave Complex 7, recorded during post-battle interrogations, provided detailed accounts of conditions that no previous military engagement had created. The combination of extreme heat, toxic gases, and psychological terror produced human responses that challenged fundamental assumptions about military discipline and defensive effectiveness. Sergeant Takeshi Yamamoto, one of only 12 survivors from the 847-man garrison, described atmospheric conditions that became lethal within minutes of initial flame discharge. The temperature increase was immediate and overwhelming, making normal breathing impossible, while creating thermal injuries even in areas not directly exposed to flame. The toxic gas production from burning napalm created additional hazards that penetrated throughout the interconnected cave system. The medical consequences of flame weapon deployment against cave positions included thermal injuries, toxic gas poisoning, and psychological trauma that exceeded conventional combat casualty patterns. Military medical personnel treating survivors reported injury combinations that required new treatment protocols developed specifically for flame weapon casualties. The systematic nature of the injuries indicated weapon effectiveness that exceeded purely tactical requirements. The psychological trauma experienced by cave warfare survivors created lasting effects that influenced subsequent Japanese defensive planning throughout the Pacific Theater. Military intelligence reports documented behavioral changes in Japanese forces that had encountered flame weapons, including reluctance to occupy underground positions, and modified tactical approaches that prioritized escape routes over defensive strength. The systematic documentation of Japanese casualties during cave warfare operations provided statistical evidence of flame weapon effectiveness that supported continued development and deployment of specialized equipment. Casualty ratios for flame weapon assaults against cave positions exceeded those achieved through conventional tactics, while requiring significantly reduced American personnel commitment. The moral implications of flame weapon deployment against trapped personnel created ethical discussions within American military leadership that balanced tactical effectiveness against humanitarian considerations. The systematic destruction of defensive positions using extreme temperatures and toxic gases raised questions about proportional response that influenced subsequent deployment decisions. The strategic impact of successful cave warfare operations extended beyond immediate tactical objectives to influence Japanese defensive planning throughout the remaining Pacific Theater campaign. The knowledge that underground positions could be systematically destroyed by specialized American equipment reduced the defensive advantages that cave warfare had previously provided. The development of M67 flamethrower tanks represented the culmination of engineering programs that had systematically addressed cave warfare requirements through innovative approaches to existing technological capabilities. The integration of proven armored vehicle platforms with specialized flame weapon systems created capabilities that could not be achieved through conventional equipment combinations. The technical challenges overcome during M67 development included fuel storage and delivery systems capable of maintaining operational effectiveness under combat conditions. The pressurized delivery mechanism required engineering solutions that balanced flame stream coherence with system reliability during extended operations. The integration of specialized equipment with existing armored vehicle platforms required modifications that maintained operational mobility while providing enhanced combat capabilities. The tactical implications of effective flame weapon deployment against cave positions extended beyond immediate battlefield applications to influence strategic planning for subsequent Pacific Theater operations. The ability to systematically destroy underground defensive positions reduced the tactical advantages that Japanese forces had developed through cave warfare, while enabling more rapid campaign progress with reduced American casualties. The psychological warfare aspects of flame weapon deployment created effects that exceeded purely tactical considerations. The terror response produced by flame weapons influenced Japanese morale and defensive effectiveness throughout areas where such weapons might be encountered. The reputation of flame weapon capabilities created psychological pressure that affected Japanese defensive planning even in situations where such weapons were not actually present. The systematic documentation of flame weapon effectiveness against cave positions provided technical data that influenced continued development of specialized military equipment. The success of M67 systems validated engineering approaches that prioritized specific tactical requirements over general-purpose capabilities, while demonstrating the value of systematic equipment development programs. The strategic success of cave warfare operations using specialized equipment demonstrated American adaptability to tactical challenges that had initially provided significant advantages to Japanese defensive operations. The development and deployment of effective countermeasures to cave warfare represented systematic problem-solving approaches that could be applied to other tactical challenges throughout the Pacific Theater campaign. This technological revolution in cave warfare tactics would prove that the most devastating military innovations often emerge from systematic analysis of specific tactical problems rather than general advances in military technology. The M67 flamethrower tank represented focused engineering solutions to clearly defined operational requirements, creating capabilities that transformed previously impregnable defensive positions into death traps for their occupants. The psychological impact would prove equally important, as word of these terrible new weapons spread throughout Japanese defensive networks, creating fear that would influence tactical decisions for the remainder of the Pacific campaign. February 20, 1945. Dawn broke over Kalamansig Mountain Range to reveal smoke still rising from Cave Complex 7, carrying with it the acrid smell of burned limestone, melted steel, and something far worse that veteran soldiers recognized but refused to name. As word of the previous day's systematic destruction spread through the remaining 46 cave installations via whispered radio transmissions and terrified messenger reports, a psychological transformation began that would prove more devastating than the physical destruction of any single position. Major Yoshiaki Matsumura, commander of the Mountain Defense Network, faced a crisis that no military academy curriculum had prepared him to address. The fundamental assumption underlying Japanese cave warfare doctrine, that underground positions provided psychological security-enhancing combat effectiveness, had been shattered by weapons that transformed protective shelter into inescapable death chambers. The mathematical equation of defensive warfare had been reversed. Positions that multiplied defensive effectiveness now multiplied defensive vulnerability. The psychological warfare implications of flame weapon deployment created effects that propagated throughout the defensive network, with velocity that exceeded physical assault capabilities. Japanese soldiers in caves that had not yet encountered flame weapons began experiencing anxiety responses that degraded combat effectiveness before any American forces approached their positions. The knowledge that protective positions could become furnaces created mental pressure that no amount of military discipline could entirely suppress. The human psychology of cave warfare had evolved through thousands of years of evolutionary adaptation that associated underground spaces with safety and protection. Japanese military training had reinforced these natural responses by emphasizing how cave positions provided security against superior American firepower and air superiority. The systematic destruction of these psychological foundations created cognitive dissonance that challenged fundamental survival instincts. Corporal Masaki Fujiwara, stationed in Cave Complex 14 approximately 2 kilometers from the destroyed position, reported psychological symptoms that began manifesting within hours of learning about the flame weapon attack. Sleep became impossible, as every sound suggested approaching armored vehicles. Appetite disappeared as the mind associated enclosed spaces with imminent death. Communication with fellow soldiers became strained as shared fears amplified individual anxieties. The psychological profile of effective cave warfare defenders required specific mental characteristics that flame weapon deployment systematically destroyed. Soldiers needed to feel secure in enclosed spaces, confident in their protective positions, and capable of sustained defensive operations under siege conditions. The flame weapon attacks created opposite psychological conditions that transformed strength-enhancing factors into weakness-amplifying vulnerabilities. Military psychiatrists studying post-battle survivor interviews identified specific psychological mechanisms through which flame weapon attacks achieved effects disproportionate to their physical destructive capabilities. The primal human fear of fire activated response systems that bypassed rational military training and tactical discipline. The association of protective shelter with death created cognitive contradictions that could not be resolved through conventional military mental conditioning. The social psychology of defensive units began deteriorating, as individual psychological pressure created group effects that amplified overall morale problems. Soldiers who had previously provided mutual psychological support found themselves sharing and reinforcing fears that degraded collective defensive effectiveness. Unit cohesion, essential for effective defensive operations, became a mechanism for transmitting psychological vulnerability rather than maintaining combat readiness. The systematic nature of flame weapon deployment created additional psychological pressure through the knowledge that destruction was inevitable rather than merely possible. Japanese soldiers understood that American forces possessed both the technology and tactical doctrine necessary to systematically destroy every cave position in the defensive network. This recognition eliminated hope for successful defense while creating certainty of eventual destruction that no military training could psychologically overcome. The internal communication network that had been designed to coordinate defensive operations became the primary mechanism through which psychological terror propagated throughout the cave system. Radio transmissions intended to maintain tactical coordination instead carried detailed descriptions of thermal destruction that created panic responses in previously secure positions. Lieutenant Hiroshi Nakamura, communications officer for the defensive network, monitored radio traffic that documented the systematic psychological breakdown of disciplined military units. Reports from forward observation positions described American flame tank movements with terror that contaminated otherwise professional military communications. Requests for tactical guidance became pleas for escape routes that did not exist. The official military communication protocols that had been established to maintain command structure during siege conditions proved inadequate for managing information about flame weapon attacks. Standard terminology lacked vocabulary for describing thermal destruction of underground positions. Military reporting procedures could not accurately convey the psychological impact of systematic incendiary assault on defensive effectiveness. The intercepted American communications, decoded through Japanese intelligence capabilities, provided additional psychological pressure by revealing the systematic nature of flame weapon deployment planning. American tactical discussions included detailed analysis of cave network vulnerabilities and planned sequences for flame weapon attacks against specific positions. The knowledge that destruction had been professionally planned and systematically organized eliminated any hope for random survival through tactical luck or strategic oversight. The breakdown of effective military communication created additional tactical vulnerabilities, as command structure deteriorated under psychological pressure. Orders from Major Matsumura became increasingly desperate attempts to maintain discipline, rather than practical tactical guidance for defensive operations. Subordinate unit commanders began making independent decisions based on psychological survival rather than strategic military objectives. The documentation of communication degradation provided evidence of flame weapon effectiveness that extended beyond immediate tactical achievements to strategic impacts on enemy morale and organizational cohesion. American intelligence services studying intercepted Japanese communications recognized that psychological effects of flame weapons created force multiplication capabilities that exceeded their purely physical destructive potential. Dr. Kenji Hayashi, the chief medical officer for the Mountain Defense Network, encountered injury patterns and psychological symptoms that no previous military engagement had produced. The thermal injuries suffered by Cave Complex 7 survivors required treatment approaches that field medical training had not addressed. The combination of extreme heat damage, toxic gas poisoning, and psychological trauma created medical challenges that exceeded available treatment capabilities. The physiological effects of extreme heat exposure in enclosed spaces produced injury patterns that differed significantly from conventional battlefield trauma. Thermal damage occurred throughout respiratory systems as superheated air caused internal burns that were difficult to treat under field conditions. Skin injuries extended over larger body surface areas than typical combat trauma, while presenting complications related to infection control and fluid management that strained limited medical resources. The toxic gas poisoning resulting from napalm combustion in cave systems created symptoms that required specialized treatment protocols not available in field medical facilities. Carbon monoxide exposure produced neurological effects that impaired cognitive function while creating physical symptoms that resembled other medical conditions. The combination of thermal trauma and toxic exposure created complex medical cases that challenged diagnostic capabilities under combat conditions. The psychological trauma exhibited by flame weapon survivors presented symptoms that exceeded conventional combat stress responses. Patients demonstrated persistent terror reactions to enclosed spaces, extreme sensitivity to heat and light, and sleep disturbances that prevented normal recovery processes. The systematic nature of the psychological damage indicated mental health effects that would require extended treatment periods not available during active combat operations. The medical resource allocation challenges created by flame weapon casualties diverted attention and supplies from conventional battlefield medicine to specialized treatment requirements that could not be adequately addressed under field conditions. The systematic destruction of cave positions created casualty surges that exceeded medical facility capabilities, while requiring treatment approaches that were not available through standard military medical protocols. The documentation of medical effects provided clinical evidence of flame weapon capabilities that influenced both tactical deployment decisions and strategic planning considerations. The medical consequences of flame weapon attacks created personnel losses that extended beyond immediate tactical casualties to long-term degradation of defensive capabilities through psychological trauma and extended medical treatment requirements. The successful deployment of flame weapons against cave positions had strategic implications that extended beyond immediate tactical achievements to influence Japanese defensive planning throughout the Pacific Theater. The systematic destruction of positions that had been considered impregnable forced fundamental reconsideration of defensive strategies that had been based on cave warfare advantages. General Yamamoto Hiroshi, commanding the Mindanao defense sector, received reports documenting flame weapon effectiveness that challenged basic assumptions about defensive warfare capabilities. The tactical advantages that cave positions had provided against conventional American assault methods were not only eliminated but reversed by specialized equipment designed specifically for cave warfare applications. The strategic implications required immediate modification of defensive planning approaches throughout areas where similar terrain features might be encountered. The intelligence analysis of American flame weapon capabilities indicated systematic development programs that had produced specialized military equipment specifically designed to address cave warfare challenges. The existence of such programs suggested strategic planning approaches that anticipated Japanese defensive adaptations, while developing countermeasures that eliminated tactical advantages Japanese forces had achieved through innovative defensive positioning. The psychological warfare implications of flame weapon deployment created strategic effects that influenced Japanese defensive morale throughout areas where such weapons might be encountered. The reputation of flame weapon capabilities produced anxiety responses in military units that had not directly encountered such weapons, while creating strategic psychological pressure that degraded overall defensive effectiveness across multiple operational areas. The resource allocation implications of defending against flame weapon attacks required defensive modifications that diverted personnel and materials from other military objectives, while providing limited improvement in defensive capabilities against specialized American equipment. The strategic trade-offs created by flame weapon deployment forced Japanese commanders to choose between various inadequate defensive approaches rather than selecting from effective alternatives. The strategic success of American cave warfare operations demonstrated adaptability to tactical challenges that had initially provided significant advantages to Japanese defensive planning. The systematic development of countermeasures to cave warfare represented strategic problem-solving capabilities that could be applied to other defensive innovations that Japanese forces might develop during continued Pacific Theater operations. Major Matsumura faced command challenges that conventional military leadership training had not addressed. The systematic destruction of defensive positions by specialized American equipment required tactical decisions that balanced immediate survival concerns against strategic military objectives. The psychological breakdown of subordinate units created leadership problems that could not be resolved through traditional military discipline approaches. The command structure that had been designed to coordinate defensive operations from protected positions became vulnerable to systematic destruction through flame weapon attacks. Command centers located in cave installations that had previously provided security for leadership personnel became priority targets for specialized American equipment designed specifically to eliminate underground command capabilities. The tactical decision-making process became increasingly constrained as flame weapon deployment eliminated defensive options that had been fundamental to cave warfare strategy. The mobility advantages that interconnected tunnel systems had provided were negated by systematic targeting of tunnel entrances. The mutual support capabilities between defensive positions were disrupted by systematic destruction of communication and coordination facilities. The leadership responsibilities during systematic defensive destruction required psychological resilience that exceeded conventional military training preparation. Command personnel needed to maintain tactical effectiveness while managing personal terror responses to weapons that transformed protective positions into death traps. The emotional demands of leadership during flame weapon attacks challenged mental health in ways that military training had not anticipated. The strategic command decisions required balancing immediate unit survival against broader military objectives that might justify accepting systematic destruction of defensive positions. The tactical reality of flame weapon effectiveness made conventional defensive success impossible, while creating strategic questions about resource allocation and operational priorities that exceeded local command authority. The documentation of command performance during flame weapon attacks provided analysis of leadership capabilities under extreme psychological pressure that influenced subsequent military leadership training and tactical planning approaches. The systematic analysis of command effectiveness during specialized weapon deployment created understanding of leadership requirements for future operations involving similar tactical challenges. The Japanese response to flame weapon attacks included desperate attempts to modify defensive positions and tactical approaches to reduce vulnerability to systematic thermal destruction. Engineers working under extreme psychological pressure developed modifications to cave entrances designed to prevent flame penetration while maintaining defensive firing capabilities. These efforts demonstrated innovative adaptation to new tactical challenges, while revealing the limitations of defensive modifications against systematically superior technology. Captain Tanaka, before the destruction of Cave Complex 7, had supervised construction of flame barriers using available materials including sandbags, steel plating, and improvised heat shields. These modifications required extensive manual labor under dangerous conditions, while providing limited protection against pressurized napalm delivery systems designed to overcome such defensive measures. The engineering challenges exceeded available resources and technical capabilities, while consuming time and personnel needed for other defensive preparations. The tactical modifications attempted by various cave installations included changes to entrance configurations, ventilation systems, and internal layout designs intended to reduce flame weapon effectiveness. These alterations required engineering expertise and construction materials that were not readily available under siege conditions, while disrupting established defensive positions that had been optimized for conventional combat operations. The coordination challenges created by defensive modifications included communication problems between units attempting different approaches to flame weapon defense. The lack of standardized procedures for flame weapon countermeasures created confusion and resource conflicts that further degraded overall defensive effectiveness. The experimental nature of defensive modifications created additional uncertainty about tactical capabilities that complicated command planning and resource allocation decisions. The psychological effects of defensive modification activities provided temporary morale improvement through the illusion of effective action against seemingly insurmountable tactical challenges. However, the reality of flame weapon capabilities created persistent anxiety that modification efforts could not adequately address. The systematic failure of defensive adaptations reinforced psychological pressure while consuming resources needed for other defensive activities. The documentation of Japanese adaptation attempts provided American intelligence with detailed analysis of enemy innovative capabilities and resource allocation priorities during extreme tactical pressure. The systematic observation of defensive modifications informed American tactical planning for subsequent flame weapon deployment, while demonstrating Japanese creative problem-solving capabilities under desperate circumstances. This psychological warfare through technological innovation had achieved what conventional military doctrine suggested would require massive resource commitment and extended campaign duration. The systematic destruction of defensive morale through targeted application of specialized equipment demonstrated principles that would influence military technology development and tactical planning approaches throughout subsequent military operations. The flame weapons had not merely destroyed Cave Complex 7, they had shattered the psychological foundations of cave warfare itself, creating terror that would influence Japanese defensive planning throughout the remainder of the Pacific Campaign. February 21, 1945. Cave Complex 14 stood in absolute silence, as Major Yoshiaki Matsumura concluded his final radio communication with Imperial Command, requesting immediate tactical withdrawal authorization for the remaining defensive positions throughout the Kalamansig Mountain Range. The response that arrived 37 minutes later would forever change how military leaders understood the relationship between technological innovation and psychological warfare. Withdrawal denied. Defensive positions must be maintained regardless of enemy capabilities. Honor demands sacrifice. What Imperial Command failed to comprehend from their distant headquarters was that the systematic deployment of flame weapons had already achieved strategic victory through psychological destruction that rendered physical defensive capabilities irrelevant. The mathematical precision of American tactical planning had calculated not merely the thermal destruction of cave installations, but the exponential degradation of defensive effectiveness through terror that propagated faster than flame itself. The cascade of psychological collapse that began with Cave Complex 7 was accelerating through the remaining defensive network, with velocity that exceeded traditional military understanding of morale degradation. Each destroyed position created exponential fear responses in surviving installations, transforming disciplined military units into collections of individuals focused primarily on personal survival rather than strategic objectives. Lieutenant Hiroshi Nakamura documented the systematic progression of psychological deterioration through communication intercepts that revealed quantifiable patterns in defensive collapse. Radio transmissions from forward observation posts demonstrated increasing frequency of panic responses, declining tactical coherence in military communications, and growing requests for evacuation that violated established operational protocols. The statistical analysis of communication degradation provided evidence that flame weapon deployment achieved psychological effectiveness that exceeded physical destructive capabilities by ratios approaching 10-1. Individual cave installations containing hundreds of trained soldiers were effectively neutralized through fear before American forces approached their positions. The psychological force multiplication achieved through specialized weapon deployment represented military efficiency that conventional tactics could not replicate. The systematic documentation of fear responses revealed that psychological collapse followed predictable patterns that could be analyzed and potentially replicated through strategic application of specialized military technology. Soldiers demonstrated consistent behavioral modifications when confronted with weapons that transformed protective positions into death traps. The universal nature of terror responses suggested psychological mechanisms that transcended cultural military training and individual resilience characteristics. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.